Hello, this is Vince Lara, Media Relations Specialist at the College of Applied Health Sciences at the University of Illinois. Today I spend a few minutes with Jon Welty Peachy, Associate Professor in the Recreation, Sport, and Tourism Department at AHS. Let me ask you, what inspired you to study in your area of research?
Yeah, well, I was working, I came into academia a little bit late. So I had a career working in Olympic sport development and international sport for about 12 years after I did my master's degree. And so I was working in community development and working in sport, international sport, and how sport can be used for economic and community and social development. So that was what I was doing as a practitioner, and organizing events, and became really interested in what we call sport for development, right, or the use of sport for social good, social change, for development purposes in some way, because I was doing it. And excited about that, and also becoming just very, very interested in leadership and management of sport-based entities, how we do that, how we can improve that. So I was doing that for a while and working as a senior executive and enjoying that. And then, but I had always thought that I might come back into academia. Just thinking that it might be a route where, through my research and teaching and consulting that I would do, that I might be able to have even a greater impact with the work that I would do. So the time came where that was okay to do from my wife, my boss, right?
Sure.
Where I could resign and go and do my PhD. And so now I've been in academia for 10 years. So the stimulus for my research, which is really a lot in sport for development, some sport development, so development through sport or development of sport, was really from practice and formulating the questions that intrigued me, where I thought that we really needed to do sport better, design sport better, manage sport better, lead sport better, because as we know, we have many challenges.
Absolutely.
Ethical as well as otherwise. And so that really just kind of prodded me to develop that research line, I grew up with a very social justice background. And my parents were very much involved in social justice activities, so I had that orientation growing up.
Sure.
But I was also an athlete and loved sport. So this seemed a way to kind of bring those together in some ways, to use something I was passionate about, sport, for causes that I believed in, and looking at how we do that the best. And we're not always successful in that. There's a lot of challenges, but so that's kind of how that all evolved for me.
Who were you working for in that capacity? Were you working for the USOC? Or?
I was working for an organization called the Institute for International Sport, which is based in South Kingston, Rhode Island. Actually.
Okay. And so when you talk about sport for development, working in that capacity, before you got back into academia, so tell me a little bit about that, what sport for development is.
Right. Sport for development would be creating sport-based programs linked to education and other types of activities that would target a certain population of individuals, could be youth, children, adults, to help them better their lives or help communities make a difference in their community sphere. So, I can give you an example. One of the organizations I work with, I've been working with for quite some time, is called Street Soccer USA. And Street Soccer USA has a mission to use the sport of soccer to help individuals suffering from homelessness make positive changes in their lives. And they have teams in 22 cities in the United States, one in Chicago. And so our research team has worked with them with their evaluation for the past 9 years. But their mission, the way they go about it is that sport is a vehicle for change packaged with education, relationship building, quality coaches, quality volunteers, using sport as a hook to attract individuals to the program who obviously are suffering from homelessness.
Right.
And then leveraging that to connect them to other types of social services that can help them to make a more sustainable difference in their lives through job training or finding and being able to hold a job, to affordable housing, But sport being that vehicle to begin to provide some healing, provide some confidence, some self-esteem, sort of foundations that we all need in order to be able to make those positive changes in your life. So in that way, sport is sort of the hook, right? To attract individuals in who, in that case, were very shy about or very turned off by clinical social services of being poked and prodded and analyzed, is what we found. And they were saying, I don't want to have any part of that anymore. And then they learn about soccer and say, oh yeah, I used to play soccer as a kid, right? Or I played and I could do that. Yeah, I'll come play. And then start having a good time and start learning to know the coaches and the volunteers and start to just do something positive. And it's through that sustained activity over time where once trust is built and relationships are formed, they might say, maybe what if we sit down and work on your resume? Or have you considered how, you might want to go to this job training seminar? And they start to get that foundation, that baseline, to be able to think about,
trust.
I could do this, trust.
Right.
So a lot of it in sport for development is trust. We almost say that the relationships that are built between the participants and the coaches, or the participants and the volunteers, or the leaders, are almost more important than the sport itself.
Right.
I mean, sport's important.
Sure.
But it's how it's done.
You mentioned your parents being social justice, I don't want to say warriors, but involved in social justice. Is that how you first made the link between sport and development? And
it was probably in college.
Okay.
I went to a small NAIA school, Goshen College, which is
Indiana,
near Notre Dame, small school, and which is also was a religious institution, very socially focused and socially justice focused, and so through playing sports and running and cycling and doing that, but also learning and being inspired by professors and colleagues and just peers who had that social justice mindset. I think the first thing I did was that really got me inspired was very, very stupid. And we graduated from college, and a buddy and I, who was another marathoner, we got this idea that, what could we do with running for social change? So we pitched this idea to some sponsors and such, and we ended up, and we were both very interested in homelessness. And so we ended up taking 6 months and running 4,000 miles from through a very circuitous route from Portland, Oregon to Boston, Massachusetts.
Wow.
Going up and down and around across the north and speaking along the way, in communities and high schools and churches and media and such, and using that notoriety or that sport there as a vehicle to begin to call attention to the plight of the homeless in this country. And so we raised money along the way to support some agencies that we identified that were working with homeless individuals. So I think that college was where I started to kind of bring that together a little bit.
Right.
And got this stupid idea to do this run, which we made it finally. Trials and tribulations along the way, but we got there. And then that kind of just, I think, launched me, after that. And so I was probably about 22 when that kind of started to really take hold for me.
What year was that? Because do you remember Terry Fox making?
Oh yeah, I remember Terry Fox.
Okay, yeah.
That was 1989.
Okay, so a few years after
that
Terry.
Dates me,
Yeah.
Terry Fox, who ran across Canada.
Absolutely.
Right, with amputee, I believe.
Correct.
Right. Yeah, very inspiring.
Very inspiring. Right.
I figure, if he could do it with one leg,
yes,
we can certainly do it with two.
Right.
Although that's not. Doesn't necessarily correlate.
Right.
There's a lot of challenges with that.
You know what I'm curious about? How do you make the outreach when you're let's say you're starting this soccer program? So what are the things that you have to do from a grassroots level to reach out to the people who are your target audience? What are the things you need to do?
Yeah, we have to have partners.
Okay.
You have to have good partners. Which is, the book that we have coming out on partnerships and sport for development and peace is all about that. So you have to identify agencies to work with. It's very, very hard to come in with an idea and launch it without working with others institutions and agencies. I think the organizations that are very successful in using sport for social change have developed very strong linkages and partnerships in the community. And it's also very important that the community is involved in the planning and design of the programs. So one of the problems that we've had in sport for development historically has been what we call a very neocolonial approach, where these ideas germinate in the ivory tower, or with individuals who have a passion for using sport for social good.
Sure.
We think we know how to do it best.
Right.
And then we're going to design this program and take it someplace, inner city, another country.
Sure.
We often think of Africa, right, as a need for development. Bring it in, run it for a couple weeks, and leave.
Right.
Without a sustainable plan and little community involvement in the planning. Now, we do that much, much better now. But that neocolonial roots in development and sport for development followed suit really was a struggle. So what we are now is saying, well, that's really not how you do it. It's, if we were wanting to help a community, it's working with them to help develop their needs. What are their needs? Involving them in developing the types of programs. And if it's sport, what's going to work in the community?
Right.
What's feasible? Involving local stakeholders in the designing and planning and leading of the programs, and not just coming in on a white horse.
Right.
And saying, hey, we have this great program, we're going to develop you. Right? And then everything's going to be good, because that's not at all the case.
Sure.
So I think to answer your question, it's really having to spend time at being in the field, developing partnerships, getting to know communities, not just flying in,
right,
and dropping something there, which has been so much criticized, and spending that time building those relationships. That's really what you have to do to have a program that's going to be sustainable over time, because ultimately you want to transition any leading of the program from yourself or your group to local community members, and build their capacity to do that. And
right,
that's where sustainability comes about, is building that capacity through resourcing, through training, through evaluation, which is where we come in with research, that eventually they can, as community members, take that over time.
Right.
And then we have a sustainable program. We can back off and still be a support, but really allow the local community to take ownership in the program. I think that's the best way.
At this point, are you finding that communities are reaching out more to you, or that you are targeting communities?
A lot of times they reach out.
Okay.
I think as you, it's a small circle, but I think as you have done work in it and at least have not done okay, I guess. You tend to have organizations or such come to us, which is great, and looking for particularly evaluation help. I think that's where a lot of nonprofits and sport and development struggle a bit, is how do we do an effective evaluation? Because often they have to do so for funders. Sure. Because funders require it. How do we do it long term? How do we measure what we need to measure? How do we they're very very, very good at the practice, and sometimes just resources they don't have to have an evaluation expert on staff. Some of the bigger ones do, like Right to Play and Up to Us, and some of the bigger ones, of course. But smaller organizations that maybe have 2 or 3 employees and then a whole host of volunteers, they want to do evaluation, but they don't have the capacity. Just don't. They're caught up in the day-to-day of running the program, of meeting the needs of the individuals in the program, and they want to do it. They know they need to, but it's hard to. So sometimes they come into a little money some way, or there's a funder that will help fund some evaluation for them. And then I think that's where we can form a nice academic practitioner partnership in sport for development, is when we, with I think from an academic side, with knowledge of evaluation, good evaluation, the research that we do, can partner with an organization and come in and help them over time to to build that capacity. And of course, as scholars, we are able to publish, and we have our research that we're doing.
Sure.
But we're also making a difference in that we're helping an organization to grow, develop, fulfill its mission, do better at what it does, kind of walk alongside them to help them develop. And that's what I find really exciting.
Yeah, it's a win-win.
Right.
Absolutely. Right. Talk a little bit about the sport development part of it. You mentioned that, I understand the sport for development concept, but talk about the sport. Like
sport development, sure, would be like, how do we develop coaches? So let's take coaches as an example, and think about youth sport, for instance. So we know that, unfortunately, in the U.S., coaches aren't often vetted. Right. So when we need literally coaches, we need coaches to coach the football team,
sure,
young tykes or volleyball. Well, is it just a warm body that we need, or is how are coaches trained? And
right.
So part of sport development would be development of coaching, of leadership, of the linkages between the different levels of sport, from grassroots to elite, and how we do that better. So if you take a sport like volleyball, sport development would be about how do we create pathways from grassroots community-based volleyball, say Champaign-Urbana, rec leagues and schools,
sure,
to identifying talent, and then those that have that talent being able to have the channels where they can move towards an Olympic athlete or elite level. Or if, because it's only 0.0001%, what then are the sport opportunities for those that, of course, aren't going to go to the elite? But how do we develop sport at community rec, a competitive level, and how's it all synced and linked together? So sport development is really about, creating a pyramid where community-based sport is at the bottom, which has to be big and strong.
Sure.
And then you have a funnel towards elite at the top.
Right.
And the resources have to be deployed in such a way that you're funding the different levels, but also you are enabling the seamless movement between levels of individuals, but also recognizing that not everybody is ever going to get to the top.
Sure.
Nor is there a goal for that.
Interesting. Okay.
And so we have to recognize in sport development that, for most people, it's about lifelong sport participation. We're never going to be the Olympic athlete.
Right.
We're going to play for the Patriots who just won the Super Bowl. But we love sport, and we want to continue playing it.
Right.
So where are the opportunities? And unfortunately, what happens is you take kids and you think of our sports system in the U.S. and you think of how we do sport in high school. So use the analogy of volleyball again. How many make the team? What happens to those girls that don't in high school? So only so many are selected. 50 try out, 10 make the team. I don't know if that's the correct number, but whatever.
Yeah.
What happens to the other 40?
Right.
How do they play?
Right.
They love volleyball. Didn't make the team. What opportunities have we created in our volleyball system to allow these girls to continue playing? Unfortunately, we don't do that well, and thus you have discontinuation of a sport. Oh, your messaging is being sent, I'm not good at volleyball. I'm cut at age 11 from the volleyball team,
right,
or the basketball team.
Right. So
the message is, okay, I'm not good at basketball, so I'm not gonna try it. I'm not gonna play anymore. Or I'm not good at volleyball, so I'm not going to play anymore. So what are the other opportunities that we have? So it's looking at how we redesign, think about sport in that way. And then linking even to sport for development, which is a lot of my area, because, we need qualified coaches. Just because somebody's homeless and loves playing soccer doesn't mean that all they care about is wanting to get off the street. They might want to improve their soccer skills.
Sure.
In fact, they do.
Right.
They want to get better. They have goals just like everybody else.
Right.
Once they see improvement, it's like, yeah, I like this. I want to get better at player. I want to be a score better, or learn how to goal keep better, or dribble the ball.
Sure.
And so, developing coaching and quality coaching, even in sport for development. When a participant is done with a sport for development program, and now they're hooked on soccer, how do they transition into, I was not saying normal, but how they transition into playing soccer elsewhere.
Sure.
Because now they're no longer homeless. They've gotten a job. They're off the street. But now, what are their opportunities for playing? And so there's a lot of kind of linkages that I think are exciting and opportunities for us to do both sport development and sport for development better.
I'm curious about the sport for development part again. So what's the tracking process when you're following someone who's entered one of these sport for development programs and into, what the post life is?
Right. Yeah, it's difficult and it's challenging because you often lose touch, and the organizations don't do as good a job as they should with staying in touch with alumni of the programs. That's getting better. So the tracking process is now, you really try to, as researchers, form a relationship with individuals that are interview subjects for me. I do a lot of qualitative research, so I learn to know them. Sure. And once that trust is built between them and you as a researcher, they're going to be more comfortable sharing contact information with you, staying in touch over time. And so in order to do a longitudinal study and you want to go back 5 years later, in many ways you have to stay in touch.
Right.
The organizations are doing better at maintaining databases now, but like with street soccer, we had a horrible time for many years of finding participants after they've were gone from the program.
Right, sure.
Because individuals with homelessness are very transient.
Right.
You here and then they go someplace else and you just lose them. So they might have been in a program, but then they've moved on. And finding them is tough. So, and I think there's still a lot of challenges in that. We're getting better at that. So I think, technology certainly helps.
Sure.
Now. And organizations are realizing that, they need to maintain that contact because funders are looking for that. They're wanting to see what's your 5-year impact, or what are graduates of your program doing, 5-10 years after they were in your program. Now that's the real telling point for impact, I think.
Absolutely.
Is what are they doing?
Sure.
How did this, not that sport is the only way to help someone or a community, but going back to them 10 years later and saying, how did this play a role in your life course? What was it beneficial? And we've done that, and a lot of folks do say that this wasn't the only thing, but it was something that really was helped to put them on a better course over time. So tracking is tough.
I imagine.
It's very, very tough, particularly with more marginalized populations, and like when you work with refugees, supporting refugees or immigrants, which is another very transient population. I have colleagues doing that work. And
oh, wow.
It's hard.
Sure.
After they've left a camp in Sudan, to stay in touch, to be able to go back and find folks that were in your study 2-3 years later is just really, really challenging.
I imagine. I wanted to ask you, the back when it was the USSR, it had a tremendous reputation for building these kind of grassroots programs that funneled kids into particular sports. Right. So how do you think that the U.S. measures up in terms of that kind of sport development among youth, as opposed to other countries? Are other countries doing it better? Is the U.S. has it improved?
Come to my class tonight.
Okay.
We're actually talking about that very topic.
Oh, interesting.
I teach a grad class on sport development, and
interesting.
What you're talking about is more of a centralized versus decentralized approach to a sport system. So we generally would associate the USSR and China and some of the communist bloc countries historically with having a more centralized, government-funded approach to sport development with all sports in the country. We're in the U.S. is more decentralized. And we have a USOC, which is not a government agency, but is set up by the U.S. Amateur Sport Act to oversee sport in the country. But then it's very decentralized to the various sport federations and such. Is one better than the other? I can't say that that's the case because you see success with the different approaches. I think it's context specific. I think we can learn from the different approaches. We do talk about in the U.S. system that some perhaps some more centralization would help in terms of the development pyramid.
Sure.
Because we're very much a free market system. It has a lot of its positives, but due to that fragmentation, sometimes it's hard for talent ID or good talent identification to take place, or if athletes mature at a different level. So instead of maturing at age, say, 8 or 9, maybe it's 14 or 15.
Right.
We've missed them in our talent ID process.
Sure.
So I think there's some things that we can learn from a more centralized system. Do we want to copy, say, the approach that Russia takes or that China takes? I don't think so. But I think there's aspects that would improve sort of an organization of the various bodies that are involved, say, in basketball.
Sure.
We have all these different, bodies involved at the youth level, sometimes with not much coordination. And so some centralization of that could probably help in some ways. So
I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned in some of your research how sport increases social capital. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it can improve relations in ethnically divided communities as well?
Well, social capital being developing a interest or a way to actively participate in society, and through the networks and trust that we have, and giving back. So when Robert Putnam sort of came about with his concept of social capital, it was about that we were very fragmented in society and losing trust, and thus we were very individualistic and not giving back.
Right.
And so social capital is about building that trust, those networks, and then that reciprocity of wanting to be engaged, engage citizens to help communities to be active citizens. And so sports' role in that can be, not always, but can be, if done well, providing trust or opportunities where trust is developed, and then providing linkages back into society for individuals who are more marginalized. So they've been isolated, say we're homeless, we're living on the streets, we've lost the ability to trust, we're all about ourselves, we're not volunteering anywhere, we're not giving back, we're just concerned about surviving on the street. Who could blame that?
Right.
And I think one quote I remember from a participant in one of my studies who was homeless and then found soccer, and he was a vet, he was 52, 53 years old, and he said to me, and he had been a participant in street soccer for 2 years.
Okay.
He was making these changes in his life and getting off the streets, getting an apartment, getting a job. And he said, what street soccer's done for me is it's reconnected me to humanity. And so what street soccer's done for me is reconnected me to humanity. And I said, boy, that's a really powerful quote.
Absolutely.
And it's exactly what building social capital is about, is connecting people back into society and where they want to give back. And so what you see then a lot of times with sport for development programs is individuals are going through the program and then they want to give back.
Yeah.
They say, I had this great experience. Now I want to come and volunteer. I want to do this.
Right.
I want to help. I want to be involved. And giving back to communities in that way. And that's really how social capital is built in many respects, is that sport can be that conduit in that sense. There's many outcomes that sport can target in programs that work at things like conflict resolution and peace building. There's any number of programs that I can think of that take place in Israel, for instance, with youth through Palestinian and Jewish, and work I've done in Cyprus with Greek and Turkish Cypriots, in Northern Ireland with Protestants and Catholics, where sport is used as a way to work at some conflict resolution issues. So obviously a lot depends on design. So if you're bringing, for instance, Palestinians and Jews together to take part in sport, you absolutely can't have Palestinians versus Jews in soccer.
Okay.
It isn't going to work, right? So you have to mix the teams.
Okay.
But that necessitates skilled leaders and coaches who are trained in more than just soccer, but are trained in conflict resolution, mediation, and all of that, because things are going to come up on the field. I mean, it's inevitable. It's inevitable, right? So a lot goes into your staffing. You just can't have anybody working with those groups. But it's through that learning to know somebody who might have been your adversary, but now you have common goals.
Right.
You're working towards something. It's physical. You're learning to trust. I'm learning to trust you. You're from the other side of the tracks.
Right.
That historically I've been told is bad.
Sure.
But now we're playing on the same team. I have to pass you the ball, and you have to pass me the ball. And it's just those simple things that begin to build trust and can start to erode some of those dominant logics or stereotypes that we have about people who are other or different from us.
Right.
And sport can be a very simple, not the only way, but a way that can help people to see each other as real human beings, as not just the other, and not just the enemy. So that's the power of that. But it really depends on the skill of the staff and the volunteers and the coaches, because they have to be trained and prepared to be able to handle mediation, conflict resolution aspects, because that comes up.
Sure.
Put people on the same team who are historically in conflict, there's going to be conflict. So
right.
You have to, if that comes up, what do you do? And so you have to be able to stop play, to use those as teachable moments, to be able to focus on what's the real goal here. It's not necessarily winning the basketball game.
Right.
But it's helping these kids to understand each other, to be able to work together, to hopefully, as they get older, that maybe they can heal some rifts, be between their communities.
You mentioned when you were talking about sport development, how the process of finding the right coach, and you just mentioned it now here. What is the process of that? Like, how do you identify the people who can have these disparate skills? I mean, you have to know the game, but you also have to know what you're going into. Yeah. How does that work?
That's a real challenge.
I bet.
It really is. Yeah. And oftentimes it's not necessarily just, say coaches that have come through the traditional coaching model or through our educational programs, say in coaching like we have here, right. In kinesiology, community health, or for sport management. It may be, but it needs to be individuals that have a very keen awareness also of this social issues and dynamics. And so, I'll go back to the street soccer example again, where a really effective coaches came from was like social work.
Right.
They knew soccer, they played soccer, recreationally, maybe at a fairly good level, so they know the fundamentals of soccer. But say now their career is as a social worker. Their career is in a service profession of that kind.
Sure.
And now they see, this is a way I can bring this together. I can bring my soccer background, but I'm also very skilled at working with individuals in crisis, and to be able to bring those together. So sometimes the coaches will come in sport for development from outside of some of those traditional pathways.
Sure.
Not all the time, but so it's, I think, broadening our understanding of where we look for staff, for individuals to work in these programs.
Sure.
Maybe it's not in just the traditional models that we have.
Right.
There can be other disciplines that we reach into.
Sure.
And then we have to train them too. That's organizations don't always do that to the best degree. And unfortunately, in sport for development, if I use that, you have a lot of organizations that fail. They have a great idea. They're maybe on track for a year or two or three, and then they've folded. And that can be due to a lot of reasons. Funding runs out.
Right.
It can also be due to leadership, management issues. You can have somebody who's very, very passionate about sport and using it for change, but is not good at fiscal management.
Right.
Or can't really understand or run the particulars of a nonprofit that well. Or is not good at fundraising, or any host of reasons.
Right.
And so, just like any nonprofit where 8 out of 10 fail, it's the same in sport for development for any host of reasons. And so, I think that's an area we can really work on. The training of coaches, but also training of leaders and staff, and that we have to have more than just passion. That it is a business,
right?
Or it might be a nonprofit, but not for profit. But you do have to know, in order to be sustainable, there are some practicalities that one must have.
Absolutely. You're talking about funding, and funders want to see their ROI, if you will. So.
Right.
I wanted to talk about, you mentioned the book that you're writing and that you have coming out very soon. Let's talk about that.
Sure. Yes, the book is an edited volume that I'm doing with Dr. Chris Green and Dr. Lawrence Chalop, who were on faculty here and now at George Mason University, entitled Partnerships and Linkages in Support for Development and Peace, Considerations, Tensions, and Strategies, published by Sagamore in town. We did a symposium. I got some funding from the Illinois International Programs Office here 2 years ago to run a symposium here at the U of I on this topic. And so we used the funding to bring in 12 scholars from around the world who worked in various sectors of sport for development, in education and health, in working with international NGOs, working at the local community level, working in the national level. And so we brought in the scholars and we ran a symposium, and the book is really going to be a compilation of the papers that were presented at this symposium.
Oh, wow.
And that was funded by the Illinois International Programs Office and also CHAD here in the College of Applied Health Sciences. So this is a deliverable from that symposium, which will have all the papers in it, as well as some other remarks on the importance of what we were talking about earlier, partnerships, and how this is so critical to sustainable and effective sport for development and social change programs, and looking at how partnerships, the challenges and strategies for doing them in these different sectors. So how do we partner with higher education institutions? How do we partner with international NGOs? How do we partner with institutions in the health sector? How do we partner with, pro sport, right? Because with their corporate social responsibility initiatives and such. So the book is really about all of that.
It's a blueprint, if you will.
Right. And so the different papers and chapters are really focusing on those different sectors and trying to provide some, the latest thinking on partnership development, in order, with the goal being to help practitioners, but also scholars and students, to understand how sport for development can be effective. And partnerships are sort of one mechanism, a very important mechanism for, and really enhancing the sustainability and effectiveness of these programs over time.
My thanks to Jon Welty Peachy. This has been A Few Minutes With.